Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Carey Heller. Welcome back to this podcast episode of Being the Best Version of Yourself. Today we're going to talk about a couple simple strategies and principles for managing adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADHD is actually a really common disorder that impacts or can impact children, teens, and adults. It used to be the mindset that kids would outgrow it by adulthood. It's not really true for the most part. Often what happens, and same thing, there are adults that were never diagnosed as kids that have it. And it was just sort of, sometimes some people cope better than others, and so it's not always as noticeable where people, it's sort of there, the trouble with attention and getting things done, but people kind of get by, and so it's never recognized until it gets to a point where unfortunately people can't sort of cope effectively and then realize that there's an issue that can be addressed to make things better. Today we're going to talk about a couple simple strategies for navigating ADHD in adults. So the first thing, we're going to talk about structure. Then we're going to talk about organization, being mindful of the things that you're good at and areas where you struggle, and then lastly, managing the emotional toll of things like making mistakes, not being able to measure up, and other negative things that can often impact functioning from an emotional standpoint when someone has ADHD or issues with attention and other issues that often look like ADHD. To add structure, what you want to do is you want to add structure in terms of time, plans, tasks, and other items. You want to do this in a way that you feel is useful. So perhaps using a calendar, a task list, a paper checklist. Each person is different. What you really want to do is you want to figure out what your needs are and then try to find a system that matches rather than trying to do it the other way around. In terms of specific calendar programs to look at, as I said before, certainly using something like Google Calendar or iCal, which is the one for Apple products, as a starting point can be really helpful because they often have most of the features you probably would need, and they're probably built in already to the stuff you're using, which in turn can sometimes make them simpler. So that being said, I think those are often worth starting with, but other ones that might be worth looking at, assuming that they have preferences that you're interested in, would be Fantastical is one that's kind of cool because it connects a task list and a calendar, so you can kind of see your tasks along with your events in one place. So that can be a good one to look at. There's iCalendar, which it's not the one made by Apple, contrary to the name, which makes it very confusing. But iCalendar, it does this. It's similar to Fantastical in that it'll connect the calendar to a to-do list, so have everything in one place. So if you say at 3 o'clock, I'm going to start writing over this report, then when you look at your schedule for the day on the calendar, you see the task of report writing on there. And so some people find it very helpful to have both in one place because when you're thinking about things you have to do, you also need to allot time for it. So in a lot of cases, seeing everything in one place can be very helpful. This is something actually you can do with Google Tasks and Google Calendar. That if you put stuff into Google Tasks, it will also show up on your Google Calendar if you're using the app or viewing it on the computer. In terms of structure, the other main thing to think about besides a calendar is having a task list. So it's essentially a place where you can keep track of all different things you need to do. One of the problems with putting all of your tasks on a calendar is that if you don't get it done when you plan to, and let's say the next day occurs, unless you think to go back to old days, you're never going to see a task on the calendar again. Whereas with a task list, it's going to keep popping up and reminding you until you get it done or mark it off as complete or reschedule it. So there are a lot of benefits of having stuff in a task list. And as I mentioned before, there are ways, with certain ones like iCalendar, Fantastical, GTask is another one that can be good, where you can essentially connect a calendar to a task list at once. In terms of programs to consider that are for a task list, the Reminders app, if you have Apple devices, can work really well because it's built into the devices. It would sync then between a phone. If you have a Mac computer, it syncs. This one actually works with Fantastical too. It'll sync back and forth as well as iCalendar. GTask, I think it syncs with, or at least will import to. So there are some ways you can sometimes with Reminder stuff sync it to other programs as well. But if you have Apple devices, that can be one that can work well. Some people really like it. Some people feel like it's not that great or not very aesthetically pleasing, although I do think it's actually improved a lot, both in terms of functionality and the way it looks over some of its reiterations. But I think that's one option. GTask, as I mentioned, is another one. And one other one that's really good is Todoist. Todoist is one. I use this for some stuff that I do. And it's great because it allows you to share stuff very easily with other people, which, I mean, a lot of the apps like reminders can do as well. But Todoist, I think it's a little bit better if you're sharing stuff with a bigger group. It allows you to view everything in one place. You can schedule stuff. It has subtasks, which is really helpful because you can set deadlines for different parts of a project. It also allows you to connect it to a calendar, so you can view your tasks in the calendar, kind of like what I mentioned before. And depending on how it's set up, you can sometimes edit your Todoist tasks from a calendar as well. Asana is another one. Again, a lot of the task lists are pretty similar. Honestly, they're probably more similar than different. So some of it's a matter of personal preference. If it's made by a company that you use a lot of stuff with already, there might be some integration things. I mean, Todoist integrates with a lot of different things. It integrates with email, so you can add tasks to your Todoist list. Google Tasks is the same thing if you have a Gmail account. Asana has some integrations. So there's really a lot that you can do with a task list. So I would really think about it as you have your calendar, you have your task list, you figure out how you're going to do that, and then you have everything else. In terms of organization, so organization for a variety of reasons is really important. And the things that you really need to keep track of, you should definitely keep organized in some way. Like, so for example, with email, it's probably really helpful to keep your email, by the end of the day, try to, like a good rule of thumb is keep it unread at 0 unread emails, or at minimum read it and then mark it off as unread until you respond if you feel like that's easier to keep track of, as long as they don't pile up too much. However, sometimes people will spend a lot of time organizing their email accounts. And so I think it depends what your purpose is. So, I mean, my philosophy with it is if you're going to go back to old emails and you need to and it's easier to like find them if they're sorted into, let's say, into folders or something like that, like then if it's used more as a filing system, I think it's helpful to organize stuff in terms of keeping it like in very well organized. But beyond that, like if you use it to exchange messages with someone and you're not going to regularly go back and look at old emails, then it's probably not worth the time to, basically file each email into a specific folder, because that may take some time, and if you almost never go back and look at the folders because you have no need to, then it can sometimes be a waste of time. I mean, obviously from an anxiety standpoint, there's not a harm in being over organized. And while I think organization is really important, I think it's important also to pick and choose the situations where organization really matters and is going to be helpful, because sometimes if you try to take on too much and try to be super organized in every single aspect of your life, you may find either it's too time consuming and that causes stress, or it's too many steps involved and you give up and then you don't do any of it. So you just have to find like the happy medium of organization that gets you what you want. It keeps you as organized as you need to be, but you're not doing a lot of extraneous steps that in the end really aren't that helpful. With ADHD, or in general if there are things with time management or organization that you're not very good with, it's important to be mindful of the things that you are good at and the areas where you struggle. And so this is where it comes in terms of things like, let's say, paying bills, remembering people's birthdays. So whatever these types of things are that maybe are not your strong points, to the extent that you can automate things like paying bills using bill pay to schedule everything and do it automatically, so you don't have to remember to log in and pay each bill, or mail a check or however you would pay it, I think certainly there's definitely some benefits of automating things. Obviously, you have to make sure the automation is set up in a way that's going to work, and you're not going to miss a step that is then going to cause a problem and you're not aware of it. So you have to make sure it's going to work right, or like especially if there's certain tasks that you share with others. Like if you have a significant other and they're really good at paying bills and you're not good at remembering it, maybe it's better if you can delegate, if they're willing to have them pay the bills, because then this way it reduces conflict if you forgot to pay something and allows them to do things maybe that they're better at, and maybe you can take on some other tasks that maybe are a better fit for sort of things that you are good at, so you can contribute to the household, or if it's work, the team effort. The final thing to think about for today, I mean, there are many things that can be helpful to address with ADHD, but we only have so much time, and obviously it's important to be efficient, so we're only going to focus on one more thing for today, and I'm sure future podcasts will probably add in lots of other things that can be helpful for this. So the last thing to focus on for today is the idea of managing the emotional toll of making mistakes, not being able to measure up, and often playing catch-up. And this can be really hard because you may be feeling like, oh, I've tried so hard, I just can never get this right, I'm always playing catch up, people are always disappointed because I'm not on top of stuff, I'm missing things. And, on the one hand, it's one thing when it's just you. So, if you're not responsible for anyone else and it's just you, still, it obviously can be very upsetting and frustrating. If it becomes things, people at work on a team, or sort of have a problem because of stuff you've done, or I don't know, as a parent you miss, bringing someone to a play date or a birthday party or something like that, then obviously it creates, a dynamic where there are other people that are being directly impacted by you having trouble with things. So on the one hand, I don't want to dwell on the negatives, but I think the idea really is to try to keep a positive mindset. If you make a mistake, the key is really to learn from it, because I think a lot of times once like something is like it has passed and it's out of your mind, a lot of people don't think about it again. And while you don't want to think about it again to ruminate, like let's say you make a mistake. Let's say, I don't know, you miss a deadline at work. So think about what could you do differently next time. And don't just think, I guess I could just pay better attention. Like make it very tangible. So maybe you're going to say, I'm going to set a reminder in the Reminders app to remind me 2 days in advance. And then I'm going to send an email to remind me 1 day in advance. Because then, one, you're taking a positive approach because you're basically creating this new system or new method that could work well towards preventing the same thing from occurring again. So the main point is to help manage the emotional toll. Be positive. Think about it. As long as you're doing something differently to try to make changes, chances are you're eventually going to find the right combination that will make changes. In addition to that, just taking general care of yourself in terms of good habits with eating, sleeping, things like that. Which again, I realize are far easier said than done, and probably are worthy of another podcast episode on maybe addressing some of those. I know I've touched on some of them a little bit here and there before, but certainly at some point we can go into more depth with those. But I hope that this is helpful. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Heller.